Are you all bookkeepers?
Yes.
Do you know what a bookkeeper is? It's not a bean counter. It's a person who keeps books. And I know two are sitting right in the front row. Charlie and Pamela Bowen's house is definitely a bookkeeper's haven. How many of you all are writers? And how many are readers? Right. Well, what I'm going to talk about is going to affect both of you all of you all. We're talking about the difference between traditional publishing and self-publishing. Now, there is a whole nother realm of e-publishing, and both of these do that. So we're really not focusing on the e-publishing as much as we are on traditional versus self-publishing. So what I've got here on, on the right-hand corner, we've got these folks, and in the left-hand corner, we've got these folks. These down this side, that's Bantam, Random House, HarperCollins, and Simon & Schuster. Those are 4 of the big 6 publishing houses. On the other side, iUniverse, Ex Libris, Lulu, and Author House and CreateSpace are the new guys on the block, so to speak. Those are the ones that are either what we would call a print-on-demand or a self-publishing house. And I'm not here to suggest that there's one better than the other, nor that you should choose one over the other. It depends on what you, the person who's writing a book, wants to do. Some people want a traditional publisher. They don't want to go through all the work that it takes to get out the book themselves. They just want to stay in their little home or wherever and write their books and hand them to somebody and let them come to the public that way. Others want control and they want to do it themselves. So they may use what's known as a subsidy publisher, and that's someone who they pay to put their book out. And then some others are completely willing to do the whole thing themselves. And there are pros and cons for each of these. Okay, what you're looking at is New York City. That's the home of the big guys, the big major publishers. And it used to be that that's where all publishing took place. If you were a New York publisher, you were almost nobody. That has changed dramatically, and as my friend Patrick will say, publishing is now a dicey business. It's changed dramatically, and it'll probably change again very soon, and it's an ever-changing landscape now. This talk would probably be different another year from now, maybe even 6 months from now it could be different. But right now, we're looking at a fluctuating market out there, a fluctuating industry, and that's scary for both the publisher, the author, even the reader, and then certainly the bookstores. So it's a matter of how do we go about navigating this landscape. It used to be that self-published books carried a real stigma. If you had had an opportunity to write a book and you found somebody to print and publish it and put it in a paper format or in a hardback format, most bookstores wouldn't carry it. That's not the case anymore, partly because of print on demand. So that stigma has gone away to some extent. From 2008 to 2010, things really made a huge change. Lots of editors and lots of people at the publishing houses got a pink slip. They downsized, these folks did, the big guys. They downsized, they closed, they consolidated, they dropped imprints, they dropped whole departments, and tried to make it through the economic crunch that had occurred. At Random House, 10% of the staff lost their jobs. That's a lot. And I've talked to a friend of mine who was an editor with Random House, and there are so many editors out there who lost their job that they formed an entirely different company called the Independent Editors Group, and that's all they do. They lost their jobs, they couldn't find new ones, and so they said, well, we'll go into business for ourselves. So they now do editing of books for people for pay. And the question is kind of which came first, the chicken or the egg? Did the digital age create some of this problem, or was it the entire economic system that had kind of imploded on itself? Was it because of the e-book revolution that bookstores and then book publishers had to downsize, or was that an opportunity that was created by the economic downturn and self-publishers and e-publishers then jumped into the void? I'm not sure we'll ever know, and that's not really what we're here to talk about, but it does have an implication for the whole changing landscape of publishing. Just to give you a few more numbers, and I'm not going to read them to you, but if you look at what's happening over the current trend now, say from 2009 or 10 to now, the number of books published, I don't mean number of books like I've got 6 sitting here on the table, I mean the number of titles. The number of titles produced by traditional publishers was only around 288,000. But the independent and micro publishers, look how many they published. It jumped, skyrocketed to over 664,000. And then in 2010, that total number jumped to over 1 million books. I mean, it's just, there's a huge explosion of books out there. Now, that's just a snapshot, of course, of what happened in that particular time frame. But it also means a couple of things. One is that authors now have a better chance to get read, and readers have more opportunities for things to read. It used to be that if you, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, that if you didn't have an agent and didn't have a publisher, you were going to get overlooked. And a lot of really good books have been overlooked because the publishing world isn't like it was when F. Scott Fitzgerald came along and he got an editor who then worked with him until his books were really, really wonderful. They saw the raw talent. Publishers don't do that anymore. They're looking for the bottom line, and can this writer bring me a profit right now when my book goes out and into the world? So it looks to me like this new trend of changing to self-publishing and micro-niche publishing is a good thing for authors and ultimately for readers. So what really accounts for this change? Is it technology? Probably so. With the ease and the availability of computers and the internet and the now print-on-demand publishing world, maybe a baby can't publish a book, but almost anybody can, especially if they have somebody who is willing to navigate all of that technology for them if they're not. So the big 6 guys, now 7 with Amazon, are not the only game in town anymore, nor are the regional publishers that are like Algonquin and some of those that are bigger, mid-size, I don't know what you would call them, but they're not the big 6 that are in New York. They're out in other areas of the country, but they are still a fairly substantial name in the publishing world. It's really now the do-it-yourself world of publishing. And anybody, like I said, who's willing to tackle it can do that. Okay, let's look at a few more numbers. These are the big ones that I had on the first slide: CreateSpace, Lulu, Ex Libris, and Author House. And you can see, again, how many titles they published in 2009. CreateSpace is a subsidiary of Amazon, as Patrick said, but they have dominated that market because of the ease of working with them and because of the clout that authors know they have because the book will automatically be listed with Amazon. There's a firm called Bowker, B-O-W-K-E-R, that tracks trends in publishing. And their vice president for publishing said in 2010, given the exceptional gains in the non-traditional segment the last 3 years, growth in that area shows no signs of abating. No kidding. Look at the numbers. Okay, so how does it really work for, you know, the theoretically way that a traditional publisher works? An author writes a book, finds an agent, the agent sells it, the book's published, the author then gets invited to go on these wonderful book tours and does signings, and royalties pour in, right? Not so much, maybe. You know, there's a few disclaimers about that. First of all, finding an agent is not the easiest thing in the world to do. Some have said, and Patrick and I were talking about this earlier, it's harder sometimes to find an agent than it is to find a publisher. Once the agent finds agrees to take your book, then they got to sell it, and that may not happen either. I had an agent once upon a time, and she had a great passion for Father's Troubles, and she marketed it to a variety of publishers in New York. And this was even after Patrick had published it. We were trying to get it picked up by a bigger firm. And I went to New York, I met with her, and she still didn't sell it. Still never sold it. She tried for probably, what, 2 years maybe, Patrick?
Oh, yeah.
Never sold it. Okay, let's assume now that the good thing happens and that they do sell it. Getting that book to market is going to take 18 to 24 months. So you've written a book, and it may be a hot topic now, but what about, we were talking about vampires earlier. What if you write a vampire novel now and an agent takes it? But in 2 years, vampires are literally dead. Okay? They're not around, and we're not doing vampire books now. Or you write a young adult book, and that's not the trend anymore. So it's very difficult to count on getting your book out when you want it out. And then the big thing is that unless they think you're going to make money, serious money for them, they're not going to do a whole lot to send you on book tours and all that kind of stuff. And so unless you're Pat Conroy or Amy Tan or somebody like, who wrote The Hunger Games, Suzanne Collins, you're going to do the marketing for the most part yourself. The other thing is that if you get an advance to write a book and you don't make back that advance in royalties, that's the last money you're going to see from that publisher. So there's a couple of disclaimers about that, okay? All right, now, let's assume now you're a self-publisher. You write a book or a nonfiction, a novel, or whatever it is. The author uploads that manuscript to a print-on-demand publisher, and voila, the book is published. No lag time to speak of. It's almost instantaneous, literally. I mean, what did it take, Charlie? 2 to 3 weeks, maybe?
Yeah.
And then you go do your publicity, your distribution, your sales, and all that kind of stuff. Well, you still had to do that if you were not Pat Conroy. You still had to do that with a traditional publisher. And then, of course, you get the royalties and the income from the book sales, theoretically. There's disclaimers here, too. You got to know how to format the manuscript so that it gets in the right, whatever all of that jargon is that the PDF people want to know, how you get it up there to them and it's right. If it's not edited and edited professionally, it's going to look amateurish. It's going to look back like those first self-published books that got the stigma of bad stuff on the shelves. And the publicity and marketing and all of that stuff takes a lot of time. And then royalties may vary depending on the publisher and depending on the way you want it distributed. Let's talk a little bit more about the pros and cons in a little more depth. Advances get paid, theoretically, if the book is really good, or you finished one book and they want you to write 2 more. Let's say they think you're good enough to write another couple books and it'll make a lot of money. Well, if you get a multi-book deal, you're going to get an advance. But if the first book doesn't sell, almost always that contract includes the ability for the publisher to cut the deal and to drop you as a book, as an author. So they won't then fulfill the multi-book deal, and your chances of selling to someone else after that go down dramatically. In traditional publishing, the theory is, again, that they actively market and promote titles. They put money behind it. And that's probably the case to some extent. It's going to depend on who you are as to how much money and how much time they're going to put behind marketing your title. They do assume all the production and distribution costs. That's the good thing. But then that means also that the amount of money, the royalties that come to you, are lower than they are if you do the self-publishing. They do take care of all those legal things, like getting an ISBN number, which is an International Book Standard number that all books have to have in order to be sold through bookstores, through libraries. A variety of things have to happen to get that out there. They take care of the copyrights, all the permissions, all of that stuff is in the contract. They submit books to contests, which is a good thing. There's a lot of prestige in having won an award. Having that gold sticker on my book makes it look a whole lot more important than if it weren't there. And then the books are available everywhere. They either go through a middleman distributor, like a wholesaler, who then sends it out to the bookstores. They get sold in the stores, at the chains, at the libraries, online. It's out there because they've got the clout to make sure that they make plenty of room on the shelves for the books that these publishers are promoting. And there's a huge prestige value in being able to say, I'm published by Random House or whoever it is. Now the reason the Father's Troubles is up there in this particular corner, aside from shameless self-promotion, is that that's kind of the way it was published. Patrick is what I would call a hybrid publisher. He is a traditional publisher and has done books strictly as a traditional publisher. He also has had situations where the contract called for some financial support from the author. So if you want to talk to Patrick about how it works for you and your book, you and Patrick can have that conversation. We had a good working arrangement and a good contract, and I made some money, which is a nice thing to be able to say, and I thank you for that. The con about traditional publishing is that in the big guys, they really care a whole lot more about selling books and making money on the bottom line than they do about the author. It's no longer Scott Fitzgerald time. They want to make money and they want it now. They only accept book submissions through a literary agent. So if you didn't make that first step to find yourself an agent, the opportunity to get that book to the publisher has just turned to zero. They set the book price, and royalties are only about 6 to 12% of the net. Now that means, and there's a big complicated formula about that, but if you sell a book for $29.95, it wholesales for 55% less than that. Okay, so it goes through a wholesaler who then sells it to a store, and by the time the net comes to you, it's little, okay, tiny. Not a whole lot of that $29.95 comes to you. It might be $3. And many, many authors never see more than their advance. The physical book is owned by the publisher, and if you want to sell it at a book event you've got to buy the books from the publisher at a discounted price, but you've got to have them yourself. And like we've talked, they only put real money behind the big names. And you're going to do most of your own marketing. And the worst thing that I think about it that really is the most bothersome is that because there's so many books coming out, it could disappear from the bookshelves very, very rapidly. I mean, it may be there this month, and 6 months later, it didn't sell, and so it's on what they call the remainder table. And I hope I never see a book of mine on a remainder table, because that means they didn't sell it. They didn't sell what you hoped they would. They didn't sell what the publisher hoped they would. And the chances of you getting back on their shelves again has gone down to some extent. And even if it is a good book and it sells out, they've got a new title coming tomorrow that they want to put on those shelves, so it's probably not going to stick around for very long. Okay, suppose you are a self-publisher. Because it's not very expensive to do that, you can put a book out quickly, and you can do a lot of them. If you're prolific, you can put out a number of books, and therefore you've built a following because you've got a whole lot of books. And of course you're going to have your own website and promote it. And that allows them to kind of get to know who you are. And that might eventually, if that's what you want, get you a publishing contract. This is a great way to do it. Who was it that said you can put out an issue of one? You can put out one book. So if you've got a really narrow audience, then you can publish the number of books you need. I have a friend who just put a book out about he was a lawyer, and he put a book out about a case that he had many years ago that he never had enough evidence to physically win the lawsuit, but he knew what had really happened in this case. And so the people who were involved in the case wanted a book written about it. And so he has published this book. Now, it's probably not going to sell more than, maybe 50 copies. I don't know. It might get more audience than that. But he's pleased that he was able to publish this book because now the whole story has been told. Your revenue is going to be higher because you've cut out a whole bunch of middlemen. Assuming that the book sells at some good rate and that you're able to promote it yourself. But the price per book to you, the revenue to you from the book, each one is going to be higher than it is on the royalties. And it's much, much faster to do that. Just much faster to get it out there. You can change the pricing too. If you decide that the pricing is too high, you can reduce it. And the next book you print can go lower. And you just simply tell the people that are distributing it that this is the new price. You can offer deals yourself, which you can't do if the traditional publisher's involved. The deal is the deal. If you're doing it yourself and you have a website and you decide that for the next 3 months you want to reduce the price of your book to $5.95, and you buy an ad on Facebook or wherever and say that, you can reduce the price to $5.95 no matter what's printed on the book, because you can offer that deal. And then there's what they call the long tail, which means that and we talked about this earlier too, in the digital age with print on demand, that book is digitized and available to be printed forever. You don't have to worry about the publisher running out of it and deciding they don't want to print any more of them. And on the flip side of that, you don't have a stack of books mildewing in your basement that you've had to buy in advance in order to have them to sell. Now, here's the catch. Do it yourself simply means do it yourself. Or find somebody who will do it for you. And some people aren't good at this stuff. They're not good at the administrative stuff. They're not good at details. They're not good at marketing. They have no clue, computer-wise or technology-wise, how to format and get the book up in the real world. And maybe they're good at it, they just don't want to do it. They just want to stay home and write. And it takes a lot of time to do all of those things. Another con is that it's a lot more difficult to get media attention or reviews if you're not a publisher. It looks self-serving if I send in a press release and says, I just wrote this wonderful book and you must review it. Well, of course I think it's wonderful. I wrote it. So it's getting that attention from somebody else to say that this book is wonderful is a little bit harder when you're the only person who's talking about it. If the agent is saying that, there's a second opinion. And if the publisher's saying it, there's a third opinion. So it's a little more difficult. Also, if you want to do a book tour, that's more difficult as well, because unless you've got some really big platform that has a broad audience, people in Columbus, Ohio don't know me from Adam's House Cat, okay? And I'm not probably going to get a book signing gig in Columbus, Ohio. I can do it here, and I can do it around the margins of here, but in some place that I'm not known, they don't care whether I'm coming through there and want to do a book signing. So that's more difficult. Contests are also somewhat harder to deal with simply because you're not aware of what they are. Publishers, that's their job to know about these contests. Authors, unless you do a lot of research on the internet, you're not going to know that there's a contest out there and the deadline is 2 weeks from now and the book needs to get sent in. And I missed a couple that I think I could have had a chance at because I didn't remember or didn't know that they had a deadline that was coming up right then. And then one of the things about self-publishing is that even if you decide to go that route, you've just got to get somebody to professionally edit your book. And then there's the formatting part. And here's where Charlie Bowen comes in. He did that for me, and it was a blessing that I could not begin to have paid for, because I didn't want to do it. I probably could have learned it. I'm technology savvy, but I didn't want to. And so Charlie formatted, and that's why this book is up in that corner, because I did self-publish that through Charlie's help, with Charlie's help. All right, now let's talk about three people that are big guys, okay? These are what I call the case studies in self-publishing and not. This man at the top is J.A. Conrad. Now, he must be the most prolific person in the world, because he has cranked out 8 books in 8 years. He's just sat down and written those things, and look how many he's sold. Now, these are e-books, I will admit. These are e-books. And in April last year, he made $52,000 self-publishing. Now, he also writes a blog online, and he is a huge promoter of self-publishing, and he's got them in, you know, a variety of formats, particularly the e-books and also the print books. But he has completely done it himself. This third guy, or second guy, Barry Eisler, has 9 books in print and online. He writes a crime series. He was I think he was originally a detective or an FBI agent or something. And he actually has turned down a $500,000 book deal to continue to self-publish. And then there's Amanda Hocking, who is a young lady who wrote young adult novels, and she is reported to have sold over 1 million of them. She's got, I think, 8 or 9 books out now, and look how quickly she wrote those. I mean, talk about cranking it out. It's a series, and that's one of the things that matters when you're doing this kind of deal, is that if you can write quickly, and they're short, and they're genre books probably, and they're in a series, then you do build up a following, because the first book that you sell, somebody wants to read the next one, and the next one, and the next one. She says she made over $1.5 million, but she used that track record to then parlay herself into a huge $2 million deal with a traditional publisher. So she must have changed her mind about how much trouble it was to do the self-publishing, and decided she just wanted to stay home and write books and let St. Martin's Press deal with the whole rest of it. Okay, we talked a little bit about this, and Patrick did too, but this book, we did submit it to agents, publishers. I got really nice rejection letters. They were not just the standard, you know, typewritten things. I actually got some handwritten ones. And then Patrick said he would publish it. So he handled all the book design and all the legal requirements, and he entered it into contests, thank you very much. And he got reviews, and it got distributed, and then I did. We kind of shared duties. Patrick did the trade stuff, and I did the personal marketing stuff. And this book sold really, really well, partially because it has a Huntington story. And in Huntington, I even took out billboards, and it was very well received. And it is a fiction, but it is based on a true story, and the people on the cover and the picture on the cover are real. Actually, Jim, that's a postcard in the background, and it's 9th Street, looking from 3rd Avenue up towards Garrity Bank, old Garrity Bank. And the 2 men are, the one in the dark coat is my grandfather on my mother's side of the family, and the other one is his partner in crime, who shall remain nameless. He's got a name in the book, but the real name will remain nameless. And then I turned that book into an e-book in 2011, and now it's available for all kinds of e-readers, and guess what? It's gotten a whole lot of new attention, which is really nice. So I continue to market it through the social media platforms and through my website and all of that kind of stuff. And I take it with me to book gigs, which I'm doing with the new book. And it's interesting that it's still selling, and it's not just here either, so I'm real happy about that. Okay, the other side of that flip, you know, that's why I'm talking about this subject, is because I've done it both ways. And I'm not sure that I would ever say that I have a bias one way or the other, because there are so many pros and cons to doing it each way, and it just depends on what you're trying to do at that moment, what your goals are for getting the book out there. This one, as I told Jim Casto when he asked me about it, he said, "Why did you self-publish this book?" And I said, "Well, at 25, you're willing to wait for a while to get an agent or a publisher and to see the book come out. At 70, not so much. So I just wanted to get this book out. And I didn't go through Patrick this time because Patrick's books have a niche. They're not necessarily novels that are not set in this region, and they're more memoir, more life writing kind of books, like Joe Dobbs' book about being a country fiddler. This is purely a fiction book, and it's not set in West Virginia, and so I decided to go self-publish this one. Charlie Bowen handled all the book design, and he did the ISBN numbers and all of that kind of stuff. He formatted it, and he uploaded it, and did whatever magic had to be done to get CreateSpace to accept it. There's also called Smashwords. Smashwords did the e-book. Is that right, Charlie? Smashwords did the e-book?
Some of the e-books, yeah.
Okay. So it's out there in a variety of formats, both the print like we have here and on digital books for both Kindles and iPads and Nooks and anybody else's e-reader that's still out there. And again, I'm doing most of the marketing and setting up speaking engagements and doing book gigs, and that's usually taking me to places where I know somebody or they know me. So it takes me back down south a while because I lived in Georgia for about 10 years, and I'm going this Sunday, next week, to Atlanta to do a joint book signing with the Southern author named Terry Kay, who wrote a book called To Dance with the White Dog. And he and I have become friends, and we're sharing a table at a bookstore in Decatur, Georgia. So I'm looking forward to that. And social media is probably one of the best ways for self-marketers to do their thing, because it's immediate, and you can reach such a large, broad audience of people. And friends of friends see what you're doing. There are things called blog tours. A blog being somebody who writes sort of folksy or book reviews or something on a regular basis, and people get hooked on reading what these people have to say. And they have started now inviting writers, authors, to send their book and answers to a bunch of questions to them. They sort of review the book and ask you a bunch of questions, some serious, some not, and then they publish it. And then people who read their blog read about your book, and theoretically it increases your sales. And so far, I've done 2 of them, and it has made a difference. I can see a spike in the book sales when those have happened. Again, the downside, as we talked about earlier, it's hard to get those national reviews. It's hard to crack those big box booksellers. Books A Million only deals with a specific distributor, and if you can't meet all of their criteria, then you're not going to get your book in Books A Million. And while it's sitting where Borders was, who sold hundreds of Father's Troubles, my book is not at Books A Million. So whether we'll ever get there or not is another story. I don't know. And it really does take a lot of time to do the business end of all of this. It's, I think that's one of the downsides, is that doing it yourself just takes time. And if what you really want to do is sit and write, then self-publishing is maybe not for you. But the good news for everybody is that, as Julia Keller said Friday night, that she believes that all of this change in the publishing industry is a tide that has lifted all boats, because there are more books out there, and there are more opportunities from whatever way you want to read it, for readers to get hold of books. If your goal is to make money, then you probably ought to find another job. Because I've learned that, and Terry Kay told me this a couple of years ago, there are only about 300 writers in the United States making their sole living from writing. 300. Now that's, consider that over 1 million titles were published last year. That's a whole lot of people who are doing something else. They're either teaching, or they're writing magazine articles, or they're doing, you know, I don't know what. But they're certainly not making their sole living from writing. But if you really want your book to get out there, then maybe self-publishing is the way to do it. If you are got a burning issue that you want to write about and you think there are people out there who would want to read it, then maybe self-publishing is yours. But the choice is yours. That's the best part about it now. It didn't used to be that way. It used to be that you had no choice. It was the big guys or not. Now that's not the case. You've got to know what your tolerance is. It's just kind of like investing in the stock market. What's your tolerance for risk? What's your tolerance, your patience tolerance, your tolerance for handling all these business details? Which is it you are better at? Are you good at writing and you want to just stay home, or is it something you like doing, is all the business stuff? Better books, good books are now seeing the light of day, and I think that's one of the best things about the change in the whole deal. And I talked just briefly about this might not have been a good trend for bookstores, but in fact, maybe the big bookstores have done badly because Borders closed, and that was a tremendous blow to the book world. But the small independent bookstores are actually growing in number, and they did in 2010, 7% growth in independent bookstores. And I think, I don't know why that is, except that their costs are lower because they've got smaller footprints. These big stores, you know, took on thousands and thousands of square footage. They've got lower overhead, therefore, and they could possibly provide better customer service, so they've got a repeat clientele that keeps coming back. And then, of course, there's the e-reader. And we really didn't talk a whole lot about e-publishing, and I'll answer questions about that if somebody wants me to. But I know from personal experience that I know at least one person who is now reading a book who never read a book before in his life, and that's my husband, Richard. He loves to read magazine articles, and he's got an attention span about that long. But the invention of a Kindle and the gift of a Kindle to him on his birthday recently has caused him to download, and now he has read 18% of Rachel Maddow's new book. Well, that's not very much, but he's moving along. So I think there are people who now are reading who didn't read before because of the electronic device. There's something about that new technology that they want to be a part of. So I will be happy to answer questions. This, if anybody is interested in more detail or repeat of it, probably not, but in case, it's going to be on the website soon, thanks to Pamela Bowden. So I will be happy to answer questions or take comments, and I'll turn the light on so you can actually see me.